because of people losing their homes because they can't make up their payments, the revenues of all 50 states have collapsed. And so for each state in the United States, the same kind of problem exists as in European countries. The government has less revenue. What is it going to do? Well, there really are two kinds of reactions. You either respond to the less revenue by finding new sources of taxation to make up what you're not getting from the mass of people who are unemployed, whose house values have fallen, or you cut social programs, because you haven't got the money, and you can't raise it from anybody, so you cut programs. So I'm going to complete this story by telling you about two different states in the United States. A big one, California, our biggest, and a little one right next door called Oregon. Very little state, relatively poor, small population. But here's the different reaction. California is led by a Republican, an extraordinary person, but we have a long tradition in America of making very mediocre actors into leading politicians. Reagan. Okay, good. So we have a long tradition, as I was saying. You know of Mr. Reagan because he became famous, but actually we have quite a few poor actors who become leading politicians, and one is the governor of California. California, as you know, is a place where large numbers of poor actors gather, and those who can't find a career anywhere else become political leaders, which, given the quality of our political leadership, makes them average sort of people. And Schwarzenegger, someone you may, I don't know if these films come here, but if you want an example of a political leader with the kind of qualities he brings to his office, go see one of his films. And so here, what he's doing, California has been terribly affected by unemployment and by the collapse of the housing market. And so he is laying off tens of thousands of public employees, cutting salaries, cutting wages, savaging the universities, the public school system, and so on. He's responding to reduced revenues by laying off workers. But now I want to tell you, because it's important, particularly I think for Greece, about the different reaction of the state of Oregon, right next door to California. Here's what happened in Oregon. They took a tremendous hit also. Their revenues of the state of Oregon collapsed. They were short $700 million for one state. It's quite a bit of money. And so they decided to do something different. In the summer of 2009, a bill was introduced into the legislature of Oregon that they did not want to respond the way the Californians did just south of there. They were not going to cut social programs. They were not going to lay off any employees. They were going instead to tax corporations and rich people. Let me repeat this to you. They were going to tax rich people and corporations to raise the taxes that could no longer be paid by unemployed people and people whose houses have fallen down and so on. So this bill was introduced. It was debated in both houses of the Oregon legislature, and it was passed by the two houses of the legislature, both of which are controlled by the Democratic Party and by the left wing of the Democratic Party. So the bill, having been passed by the legislature, went to the governor, who, because he's also a member of the left wing of the Democratic Party, signed the legislation. And it became the law. Immediately, the business community and the conservative Republican community, which is big in Oregon, launched a referendum demand. In the western states of the United States, we have peculiar laws that allow people, if they're not happy with a law, to very easily force the law into a public referendum that everybody votes on. Don't worry, in the eastern part of the United States and in the middle, we do not permit anything like that. This is a peculiarity of the West. It has something to do with pioneers or killing Indians, I'm not sure. And so they forced a referendum. saying that this legislation is terrible, corporations, if they have to pay taxes, and rich people will leave Oregon, or not the usual arguments. And so they spent millions on a campaign. And so in January of this year, the referendum was held. 1.2 million Oregonians went to the polls on a Tuesday to vote yes or no in favor of the law. And you know why I'm telling you the story. Clear majority supported the law. Oregon taxes rich people and corporations and lays off nobody. So please be aware that even in the United States, there is conflict and struggle about how to react to this crisis, and very different responses. Of course, the rich and the corporations are furious, and they have threatened to leave Oregon, to which the response of the governor was, if you wish to raise the ante of this conflict and not behave like appropriate citizens in a democratic society, you will not keep your property very long. Uh-oh. So even in a country you might not have expected it, possibilities exist for a very different solution and response to this crisis than you might have expected. So let me turn then to my conversation with you about the revival of Keynesian economics in the United States, to tell you where it is and what I think it means. First, the leading cause of the revival of Keynesian theory and the revival of the careers of Keynesian economists and the changing career plans of young people studying economics in the direction of Keynes has first and foremost to do with the crisis that hit the United States economy in 2007. So bear with me as I take you through briefly what the reaction of the government at the time was. We were still then governed by George Bush and the Republican Party. It is important for you to know that the government of the Republicans, which had been completely committed to neoliberal economics, to the notion that that government is best which governs least, that the government should keep its hands off the economy, interfere minimally, and let the private market do its wondrous things, that government changed its behavior instantly and immediately. It waited as long as it could, even though the signs were there that the government needed to intervene in 2006 when the housing market began to change. And the signs got worse in 2007. They waited. They waited. But when it finally became a disaster in 2008, they didn't wait anymore. Starting with the Bush administration, the government of the United States massively intervened, pushed aside the private sector without a word. All large banks in the United States were nationalized. The form that this took varied, but you should be aware the government guaranteed the debts of the banks, the government bought the assets of the banks that had become worthless, and the government invested in newly created shares of the bank, basically to give them free money. All of those things were done. The Treasury did it, and the Federal Reserve, that's our central bank, did it simultaneously. The only difference with the Obama administration, it continued this policy, it just did more of it. It had a bigger program of rescuing the banks, taking them over. When it became clear that our insurance industry in the United States had also collapsed, I'll give you just one example. The largest insurance company in the United States, also the largest in the world, is something called the AIG Corporation, American International Group. They had developed, in the 1980s and 90s, a mechanism for insuring all of the debts that the banks were busily creating. The beauty of this is we have laws in the United States that control insurance. So the way that AIG got around this law was by calling an insurance policy. By the way, the way it worked was if the borrower defaults, the insurer makes good on the debt. So now you don't have to worry